as I understand it, numbers in China operate in a very different way, and that in some sense the number is a target that signals to the rest of the system what to do. Explain to me why it's so challenging to report, and how someone from the West, or you're not from the West, I guess you're from Australia.
Well, we see ourselves as.
But how do you do your job, and what have you learned about how the Chinese relate to numbers?
Okay, so I mean, certainly working for the Wall Street Journal, pretty much every story you write revolves around data. So the data problem in China has a lot of different aspects to it. So on one level, there is this sense that there's some truth to it, that some Chinese data just is outright incorrect. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's propaganda. I know Anne made this point that often it's a target, but often it's propaganda. I mean, you take something like the GDP figures. No one really believes that the GDP figures is what Beijing says in any given quarter. They're just too smooth. There is no possible way that the numbers are
It's like Bernie Madoff's portfollo, 15% every year.
That is a perfect way to describe it, right? That is, the numbers just don't change as much as they could. It must be changing for a country with 1.4 billion people. So there's that. And so in some ways that's kind of, it's propaganda. And I think often foreigners kind of look at that and they just kind of feel like the Chinese it's almost a personal slight, that the Chinese are lying to us. When they put out these numbers, it's us that they're lying to. When for the most part, so much of the problems with Chinese data, it's a real problem and a frustration to the people living within the system. Now, sometimes you have things like GDP, which kind of has a propaganda purpose. Sometimes the problem is, local officials, they have a target that they have to meet, or they have to show that they're being particularly successful at, achieving a certain level of growth, or bringing in generating a certain amount of employment. And so they often just outright lie about the numbers, and then they pass that up the up the chain of command, and then level above them lies to their superiors, and on all the way up to the top. Sometimes the big problem, particularly as a journalist, is that you find a figure, and then it's published by the central bank, and then the next month or the next quarter or the next year, that figure just doesn't exist anymore. So you don't have comparable data from one period to the next. Or another huge frustration is that they change the definitions. Same issue. You can't compare it from period to period. And that sort of opacity is almost, it's sort of a tool of governance. If you can't, as an outsider or even inside the system, if you can't tell exactly what's going on with the system and the economy, then that gives the authorities a certain degree of power and control to be able to control the narrative of what they want you to believe is going on. And so, yeah, as a journalist, this can be incredibly frustrating. And you spend, after a while, you kind of work out that, you can find new and interesting data sources that aren't being massaged because no one's really looking at them. No one thinks they're important. And so you can kind of dig out interesting stories from stuff that just isn't really getting much attention.